So I'll begin, Amar.
Yeah, please go ahead.
All right, okay. So hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you joining us today for this webinar on capturing the resilience dividend in the Pacific, dissemination webinar on the Global Infrastructure Resilience Report 2025. On behalf of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI, and the Pacific Region Infrastructure Facility, PRIF, it is a pleasure to welcome you all to this jointly organized session. As the name suggests, this webinar aims to present the key insights and messages from CDRI's second Global Infrastructure Resilience Report, also known as GIR 2025. As we are aware, climate and disaster risks are increasingly challenging infrastructure systems across the globe. And for the Pacific Island nations, these impacts are felt even more acutely, affecting not only physical infrastructure, but also livelihoods, connectivity, economic resilience, and community well being. Against this backdrop, today's session is an opportunity to explore how stronger evidence, analytics, and practical resilience approaches can help inform more resilient infrastructure planning, investment, and decision making across the Pacific region, leveraging the insights that GIR 2025 has to offer in terms of risk assessment, resilience finance, institutions and governance, emerging technologies, and also nature based solutions, among some other approaches. Additionally, this webinar will also bring in regional reflections and experiences from stakeholders and partners in the region. Just to briefly walk everyone through the flow of today's session, we'll begin with opening remarks from both CDRI and PRIF. From CDRI's end, we'll have Ms. Ranjini Mukherjee, who's Director Research, Knowledge Management and Capacity Building, to deliver the opening remarks. And we'll also invite Dr. Robert Guild, who's the team leader for PRIF, to deliver the opening remarks on behalf of PRIF. After we have that segment, this will be followed by a presentation of the key findings from the GIR report, GIR 2025 report by the CDRI team. And following the presentation, we'll move into reflections from regional representatives and distinguished speakers who have joined us today. And finally, we'll also have questions and answers with the audience. And with that, it is now my pleasure to invite Ms. Ranjini Mukherjee from CDRI. So, Ranjini, over to you for the opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Aishwarya. Once again, good morning, everyone. On behalf of CDRI, it is a pleasure to welcome all of you on this very important webinar that we are organizing to share the key messages from the Global Infrastructure Resilience Report 2025 that CDRI launched last year at the COP in Belém. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank PRIF for collaborating with CDRI in organizing this webinar for the stakeholders in the Pacific region and all the participants, partners, and colleagues who have joined us today in this webinar. Today's session, as Aishwarya already mentioned, will provide a very structured overview of the key findings and the insights from the GIR 2025 report, following which we will be having a conversation with some of the experts from the region and also the PRIF colleagues. As you heard, GIR 2025 report is a flagship research of CDRI, and it has already made important contribution to the global discourse on DRI. This report builds upon the first report, which was launched in 2023, which provided a very compelling narrative on what is resilience dividend, why it is important to invest on resilience of infrastructure. GIR 2025 builds upon the first report, and it takes us from what to how, in the present context of uncertainty and risk becoming increasingly complex and interconnected, which is resulting in huge losses to infrastructure huge losses to the countries due to damage to infrastructure and interruption of services. GIR 2025 provides concrete and practical recommendations on how to build resilience of infrastructure for a wide range of stakeholders. The report emphasizes that resilience should be integrated across the entire life cycle of the infrastructure, and highlights that investment on DRI helps us to achieve disaster risk reduction goals, SDG goals, economic stability, and also in protecting communities. I'm confident that today's discussion will generate meaningful insights and constructive dialogue, and I encourage everyone who has joined us today to actively engage with us during the session and share their perspectives. I'm also very delighted to invite Ede, who is our lead coordinating author, who has kindly agreed to join us today for this webinar. And with this, we will now start with the presentation of the report. Maybe I hand over the floor back to Aishwarya. Would you like to come in now, Aishwarya? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ranjini. So as mentioned by Ranjini, we also have the coordinating lead author with us, Dr. Ede Jas, and we'll head into the presentation also. But before that, if I may just invite Dr. Robert Guild also to share some opening remarks, following which we'll begin the presentation.
Sure thing, and thank you, Aishwarya. Nisam Bulavinaka and Namaste, coming to you from Suva, Fiji. I want to just share two quick pictures to set the scene, because I know we're all waiting to hear from the technical experts on this. But hopefully you should see my screen now. Yes?
We cannot see it, Robert.
Oh, okay. How about now?
Yes, we can see.
Yes, we can see.
All right. I want to make just two quick points with two quick slides. First of all, infrastructure investment in the Pacific has been substantial and is growing. Development partners have committed about $1 billion a year on average over the past 15 years, and there is now $2 billion USD planned in the next 5 years. This doesn't even include private sector investment or domestically funded projects. But the report notes that Pacific Island countries, island countries in general, face disproportionate risks. And in the Pacific, it's perhaps some of the most dire consequences of natural disasters. They are among the world's most exposed and vulnerable countries. The chart here shows 120 years of data on natural disasters. In Papua New Guinea, for example, on average, 3 natural disasters a year. In Fiji, more than 2. Same with Vanuatu, and so on. And each natural disaster can take out years of GDP growth. The earthquake in Vanuatu in 2004 was a prime example. Cyclone Winston in Fiji was estimated to wipe out 25% of GDP. So resilience matters, and I'm looking forward to the report's conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robert. I think with that, we'll move on to the next segment, which is the presentation of the GAIR 2025 report. I am just going to start sharing my screen, and please let me know if you can see the presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see the presentation, Aishwarya. I hope it is in the PowerPoint mode.
Yes, I have put it in the slideshow mode. So I invite Ranjini, you to begin with the presentation, and then, of course, the CDRI team, all of us will take us through.
Thank you. Thank you once again, Aishwarya, and thanks to Robert as well for kind of bringing in the perspective from the region. As I mentioned already, that the second report, GIR 2025, builds upon the first report, which we released in 2023, which already provided a comprehensive overview on what do we mean by resilient infrastructure, what is resilience dividend, and what was the very rich insight on the global infrastructure risks. The central element of the GIR 2023, as well as to a large extent of GIR 2025, is the GIRI tool, because that's the tool which we have used to come up with cutting-edge analysis on the infrastructure risk that is embedded across various sectors, and also to understand the impact of different hazards on various infrastructure sectors. GIR 2025 builds upon the first one. It is a movement from what to the how. Next slide, please. We prepared this report in a very consultative manner. We actually engaged with more than 150 experts from across 44 countries. We did surveys with infrastructure professionals, we did surveys with businesses, and this report is also very rich in evidence. It provides 73 case studies from 41 countries, and also this report provides very detailed risk analysis from global to national to subnational. Next, please. Coming to the key messages, but before going to the key messages, I would also like to highlight 4 key questions that this report has tried to address. First, how much damage will our country's infrastructure face from natural hazards and disasters, and what hazard will cause more damage? Second, the report has also tried to look at how do we go about building resilience infrastructure? What are the available tools, technologies, solutions, and what are the good practices from across the world? The third, the report has also tried to look at what are the provinces within the countries or which are the sectors which need more attention to enhance resilience, and where can we invest our resources, whether we look at the invisible, try to gain the invisible resilience dividend, that is, try to invest on maintenance or retrofitting, or we focus on doing a very robust cost benefit resilience cost benefit analysis so as to ensure that all the new projects which are being implemented are resilient. And finally, we have also tried to look at what are the various enablers, what are the changes needed at the policy level, at the regulatory changes that are essential, and what role the private sector and businesses play in this process. Next, please. Whereas the report provides very detailed recommendations across the various work streams, there are 8 key messages which are emerging from this report, and these messages are as follows. The first is, and the most important one, is the indirect impacts of infrastructure service failure, and we have provided quite a rich analysis around it, which our lead coordinating author Ede will provide more insight during his presentation. But what the report clearly shows is that the indirect impacts of infrastructure service failures can be as much as 7 times larger than the losses that will be incurred due to direct damages to infrastructure assets. The second important recommendations of the report is, or the key message from the report is, the new infrastructure investment should be informed through risk assessments and cost benefit analysis. And again, Ede will provide very rich insight on the analysis that we did for SIDS, including some of these Pacific Island nations. And these risk assessment and cost benefit analysis will help us assess the return on investment through direct and indirect benefits. The third message is the faster recovery and recovery preparedness can help reduce the impact on GDP. And it also tells us that faster reconstruction can also help us to reduce the losses to 1/3. We did a robust survey with the businesses, and what we understood that the businesses are the front line of disasters and have a long way to go to build their resilience. The fifth important message that is emerging from this report is about strengthening codes, standards, and regulations, and how on investing on invisible measures like maintenance and retrofitting are critical for building resilience of infrastructure. We have done a survey with more than 3,000 professionals, and maybe a little later we'll be providing more insights from that survey as well during the presentation. Technologies can transform the pathways for DRI. This is one of the very important messages which is emerging from the report, and my colleague Aishwarya will provide more insight on it when she presents. AI-powered early warning system to 3D printed emergency housing and drones for preventing maintenance are some of the case studies she would highlight. Seventh message is on the nature-based and hybrid solutions and how it can be very cost-effective to build resilience of infrastructure systems. And finally, insurance is indispensable, but not enough. Resilience financing requires a layered approach with a range of financial instruments for different risks. So with this, I'll hand over the floor to Ede to kind of take forward the presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ranjini. And let me just change the presentation, Aishwarya. If you can close, then let me do that. And look, first message is that we can't present the richness of the report in this small, short time. So I just want to give you a little bit of an appetizer of what are the main findings. But let me start first with the common framework. So when an infrastructure asset, is performing under normal circumstances and a disaster hits, then depending on how much capacity it has to absorb that disaster, it can go its operational normal operational performance down to half, to three quarters, even to zero. It can be destroyed. Then the operator, the asset manager, or the government begins to get ready, does the cleanup of the debris, does the contract for the repairs, gets all the materials. So, how fast that process goes is depending on the capacity to respond of the government, of the utility, of the asset manager. And then it begins the reconstruction phase, and how quickly depends how steep this capacity to recover goes until the asset is built back better. So, what we call the resilience dividend is that as governments, as the private operators of infrastructure, as the utilities, develop a stronger capacity to respond, then the shock is not as strong next time. They move faster to do the response, they do faster to do the reconstruction. And this white area on the lower side is what we call the resilience dividend. And therefore, the question of the report was always how those three capacities to absorb shocks, to respond to disasters, to recover from those disasters can be strengthened so that governments, private sector, utilities, operators can capture that resilience dividend. So let me start with a brief description of the model that we use called the GIRI model. And this GIRI model is the Global Infrastructure Resilience Index and Model that uses and analyzes three geophysical and four hydrometeorological hazards: earthquakes, tsunamis, landslides, cyclones, floods, landslide due to rainfall, and droughts across nine infrastructure sectors. Everything that you can see from power to transport, water, communication, buildings, you name it. And basically, the idea is that we begin and we collected the most comprehensive database globally of all infrastructure assets around the world, a combination of all databases available to understand what is the exposure, to combine that with the best databases on hazard, and we had a really sophisticated set of models to understand the vulnerability, not only of the asset, but of each of the components of those assets to be able to understand the risk. But we didn't stop there. We began to really look at what are financial indicators of economic losses that we can translate that engineering analysis into numbers that ministries of finance or ministries of planning can begin to use. So this model was built similar to what the insurance industry uses, like some of the models that PICRAFI uses in the Pacific or CRIF in the Caribbean, but it tends to have greater openness of the model for all of your users. We have global databases built from the bottom up, detailed asset databases, detailed proxies otherwise, and it includes a resilience index to account for the inherent resilience weaknesses in different categories of countries. Now, what is useful is because we build the model from the bottom up, then it is applicable at different geographical scales. We can model future climate scenarios, and it gives us very practical financial indicators to understand what are the average annual losses, considering the entire spectrum of potential disasters, the really catastrophic ones, the really hard ones, but also the medium intensity ones that sometimes don't make the news, but are really important for households and for small businesses. And it helps us calculate also the probable maximum loss. So these are some of the results at the global level that you begin to see. What are the average annual losses? Let's say on the roads and railways globally, $102 billion a year gets lost every year on direct damages to roads and railways, or to power infrastructure, $110 billion a year on the right-hand side. So it allows us to begin to get a sense of the contingency funding requirements that countries have, the insurance levels, and what are the priority hazards to prepare for. For example, here, and these are global totals, it allows us to understand that flood and wind are associated with around two-thirds of the power sector annual average losses, but that wind is two-thirds of the telecommunication sectors, and that landslides and earthquakes are about three-quarters of the road and railways annual average losses. It begins to give you a lot of interesting analysis that you can make in that process. So we began to do it. Okay, what does that mean? How can we apply the model to the small island developing states. And this is one of our working papers that I encourage you to take a look because there's a lot of detail in that report that may be of interest to you. For example, we calculated that the average damages to buildings and infrastructure in all small island development states is $5.2 billion a year. Now, in the news, you only see the big cyclones, the big hurricanes, and the disasters, but this probabilistic analysis considers all kinds of disasters of different scales, and therefore it gives you a better sense of the average annual losses. And you can see which ones are more important in terms of sectors. Telecommunications in green, 39%. Power in blue, 35%. Roads and railways, 143 million a year, 9%. So it begins to give you a sense of that process. It gives you a sense of which are the most important hazards. This is not going to be a surprise to you. 62% of the average annual losses are related to cyclone and hurricanes. But did you know that earthquakes are also very important? Here in yellow, almost 13% of the annual average losses are due to earthquakes. And you may remember the Haiti earthquake that was catastrophic, but it's not as frequent. The advantage of this modeling is it allows you to have the real average and the real probable maximum losses so that you can have a sense not to forget certain hazards that do exist that may not be as frequent, but it may be very important. Another analysis that we took is that it's not only important to look at the total average annual losses, because if you only look at that, then the big losses will happen in the developed countries. You can see here in the blue dots, that's where you have the maximum absolute losses in Japan, in China, and the United States, because they have a lot of infrastructure assets. But what if you look at the relative average annual losses, meaning how much on average do you lose versus the total assets that you have? Well, it turns out that then it's the small island development states that become really important because your losses after disasters may not be large in the global comparison against the US, but for you it is relatively extremely important. It has tremendous impact on the infrastructure assets and on the economy. And you can see here all of you, Dominica, Vanuatu, Virgin Islands, Bahamas, everybody, all the red dots have the highest relative average annual losses in the world. And therefore, the message of the report was saying, look, if the world really wanted to support the small island development states, resilience is important and it has a disproportionately high benefit for these economies because of their small size. We were able to analyze what happens across different subgroups, the Caribbean, the Pacific, the other territories that are included as part of the small island, not development state, but the small island territories, and you can begin to do all kinds of cuts in that process. And because the model is built from the bottom up, we're actually able to see at the subnational level. So we did this analysis in Fiji, and we use much higher resolution based on the information from the country and not only on global databases. And therefore, it allows us to really begin to see that the tropical cyclone and the floods are the ones that are particularly important. And you see in the different islands and in the different districts, what is the annual average losses that you have. And you begin to see that the infrastructure risk is highly concentrated in Viti Levu and Vauna Levu, and particularly around Suva, Nadi, Lautoka. And then there are multiple interactions between earthquake and tsunamis that remain critical for low frequency but very high intensity. So this model allows you to do really exciting set of analysis into this process altogether. And the best part is all publicly available. You can take a look at our public database, the Global Infrastructure Risk Model and Resilience Index. You can do all kinds of analysis for your country, for your sectors, all kinds of ways, and we are encouraging everybody to be able to use this information. And many institutions, the World Bank, Oxford University, UNECA from the UN Economic Commissions are beginning to use this data for their analysis of risk and resilience. I want to conclude with a few words of what we did in this GIL 25, which is, okay, let's not stop just at calculating the direct impact, the cost of the bridges and the roads and the power lines and the telecommunications. But why don't we combine that model with a macroeconomic model that allows us to understand what are the implications downstream? What happens to the farms that are not able to send their products to the market because the bridges and roads are closed? What happens to factories that don't have the power because the power plants or the power distribution lines are destroyed? What happens to the exports because the ports or the airports are damaged? And we combine these two models, the engineering risk analysis with a macroeconomic model, and then we began to realize that, you know what? Those indirect costs, the implication on the farmers, on the small business, on the export industries, on all of those businesses is 7 times larger and in most cases hidden on the economic impact of these disasters. So while the numbers that we were presenting from the engineering analysis is important for the Ministry of Transport or Ministry of Telecommunication, the reality is that Ministries of Finance needs to pay even more attention to the resilience of infrastructure because the economic impact of these damages is 7 times larger than the direct impact. But what is the good news? The good news is that we began to say, look, the reality today is that these disasters, the reconstruction takes a long time. It's incomplete, there's never enough resources, it suffers, and therefore this is the common situation. Last year was the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina in the US, and we were listening to some of the reports that many of the infrastructure still hasn't been rebuilt. So we said, okay, if this is the situation, what happens if countries get serious and complete their reconstruction in 10 years? Sounds like a long time, but if you do full reconstruction in 10 years, that impact of 7 times can go down by half. And what if you reconstruct in 4 years, let's say? Let's get serious, let's do the reconstruction, let's do the planning, the financial instrument, the procurement, and let's reconstruct in 4 years. Well, it turns out that that economic impact can be reduced to a third. So a message from the report is that it's not only important to build back better, but it is critical to reduce the economic impact to build back better faster. Thank you so much. Back to you, Ashwarya.
Thank you, Eddie. I'll just reshare my screen. I hope everyone can see it now.
Yes.
Great. So, Ranjini, if I may kindly invite you once again to continue with the presentation.
Thank you, Aishwarya. So as I mentioned at the beginning that as a part of the report, we also conducted a global survey where we actually engaged with more than 3,000 professionals working in the domain of infrastructure resilience. And we actually also engaged with over 100 experts from across 47 countries. Why we did this survey? The whole idea was to also get the perspective from the ground, to hear out the people who are actually working on building resilience or planning resilience, constructing resilient infrastructure. So as a part of the survey, there are several key findings. As I mentioned, that this is going to be an appetizer, but we have a very detailed working paper which is also available, and you may like to go through that paper to get very details about this survey. But some of the key findings that emerge from this survey are as follows. Institutional capacity for infrastructure resilience remains low across public and private sector. And what we have done, if you look at the bars which are there in this presentation, what we are seeing that in the East Asia and Pacific, when it comes to public sector, it says that 32% have adequate, sufficient to implement resilience measures across ministries and agencies, whereas 42% of the respondents find it sufficient in some agencies, but significant gaps in others, and 26% have highlighted that there is insufficient capacity to implement measures without substantial external support across ministries. If we look at the situation in the private sector, what we see that almost 38% of respondents have felt that private sector has adequate capacity. Almost 42% of the respondents have found that sufficient in some agencies, but significant gaps in others. And then finally, 9% felt that there is insufficient capacity within the private sector to implement measures without substantial support from other partners. Next, please. The second key message that comes from this particular survey is that coordination between infrastructure and disaster risk management agencies remains fragmented and inconsistent. The third message also is that despite widespread existence, adequacy of national regulation codes and standards remains low. Next, please. Next slide, Aishwarya. Yeah.
I have already gone to the next slide.
I think there is a lag, but that's okay.
Okay.
The another very important finding that emerged from this survey is that global infrastructure resilience is that there is an underinvestment in invisible resilience measures such as maintenance, retrofitting, data system, compared with more visible interventions like post-disaster reconstruction and new infrastructure. Next, please. The survey also reveals that PPPs as the most established mechanism, with half of the respondents noting selective use in high-profile project, though only 15% reported consistent integration. The survey also finds that thematic bonds also throws light on the thematic bonds, and it says that 62% reported no or rare use, and just 7% saw application of this consistent application of bonds across sectors and across region. It also throws light on the insurance mechanism, with 11% noting consistent integration, while slightly higher than bonds, but still modest. So which clearly indicates that penetration of insurance mechanisms is also currently limited. We also did a survey with the businesses. We covered more than 500 companies from all regions. And what the business survey told us is 70% of these businesses use early warning systems and digital risk analytics, but only 37 have access to reliable vendors or service providers. So there is an enormous market opportunity to work in this space, but at the same time, it would be wrong to think that businesses are very well prepared to face the impact of disaster. So there is a lot need to be done in this space as well. 87% of these businesses have insurance, but 42% have only partial coverage for revenue or asset loss. And finally, a very important finding is that 77% said government policies for resilience are either absent or poorly enforced. Next, please.
So I think, Ranjani, I'll take over from here for a couple of slides. Thank you so much.
Aishwarya, sorry. So maybe what I do is one quick point that I would like to mention, which is that, as I said, particularly the survey that we did with the infrastructure professional, it provides several other important insights which we could not capture in this presentation, but we encourage you to go through the working paper, which is very rich, which provides a lot of analysis and recommendations across different stakeholders group and across different sectors. With this, maybe, Aishwarya, I hand over the floor to you to take us through the NBS findings. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ranjani and Eddie. Through this component under the GEAR report, what we've tried to do is reiterate the growing role and relevance of NBS and also hybrid solutions in strengthening infrastructure resilience. One of the emerging insights here has been that despite the strong evidence and increasing global examples of NBS are still not being widely implemented at scale. And in fact, only around 15% of professionals, which we surveyed, which Ranjani just presented they reported the consistent use of NBS in infrastructure systems today. So we are really venturing here into how we can move from isolated pilot projects towards scaling and mainstreaming NBS within infrastructure planning and investment. At the same time, the report shows that the economic case for NBS is very compelling. These solutions can cost nearly 50% less upfront than traditional gray infrastructure, while also generating nearly 28% additional value through wider environmental and social co-benefits. So, the chapter on NBS as part of GET 2025 also brings together practical case studies from across regions, demonstrating how NBS are being used to strengthen capacities to absorb shocks, support response during disasters, and also enable faster recovery afterward, which Eddie just presented. Now, building on the earlier discussion, the chapter also focuses on what is needed to move NBS from successful pilot projects to mainstream infrastructure practice. The report highlights that even where NBS designs are technically sound, institutional bottlenecks often prevent implementation at scale. And in this context, a readiness checklist provides a structured framework for infrastructure agencies to assess whether the enabling conditions are in place to support NBS effectively. And importantly, this checklist also focuses not only on individual projects, but on the broader systems that allow these interventions to succeed. And these include policies, governance structures, organizational capacities, financing approaches, and adaptive learning mechanisms. In this component, it is also emphasizing that institutional readiness is ultimately what determines whether NBS remains isolated or becomes part of the mainstream infrastructure toolbox. And overall, I think what we're trying to highlight here is that scaling nature based solutions is not only a technical challenge, but equally an institutional governance challenge requiring long term coordination, capacity, and enabling systems. Now, like Ranjani was mentioning earlier, that we also have a component on technologies for DRI. As you can see on the slide, we've tried to take you through what we exactly did in this chapter. But just to introduce you to this component, basically the purpose of this component and the study was twofold. Firstly, we wanted to explore how technologies can be used to build resilient infrastructure. And secondly, we also wanted to provide governments, infrastructure agencies, private sector operators with practical frameworks, pathways, and examples to support successful adoption. Herein, more than 35 different types of technologies were assessed across over 100 case studies globally, showcasing how technology is poised to radically transform DRI over the next decade. And it identifies basically three key areas, which you can see on the screen, where technology can drive resilience. One is improving the data value chain. And we have also enlisted a number of technologies that can help in each of these three domains. So under this, we have remote sensing, sensor networks, drones, etc. Then we also have strengthening connectivity, communication, and collaboration. This is the second area. And we also have enhancing asset and network performance, together enabling better decisions, faster response, and more robust infrastructure systems. But what we observed was that their adoption remains limited, as highlighted here. Out of the 3,000 professionals that we surveyed in our professional survey, globally, only 12% report consistent use of these technologies. So what this is reflecting is that there's a clear gap between innovation and implementation. And it is being reinforced that the challenge is not the availability of solutions, but the ability to scale and integrate them effectively. Just to give you a snapshot of around the 16 case studies that we fit into the chapter from our broader review of over 100 global examples. So you can see that starting with Latin America and the Caribbean, in Ecuador and Italy, 360-degree imagery has been used for post-earthquake reconnaissance, while in Trinidad and Tobago, virtual reality has supported preparedness. In Asia, we have AI-based early warning systems that have been deployed in India. Drones are being used for damage assessment in Japan, and mobile platforms have supported reconstruction monitoring in Nepal. So these examples are detailed further in the accompanying working paper, which we, of course, invite you to read and browse through, which is available on our website. And these clearly demonstrate that technology is already being applied globally across preparedness, response, and recovery to strengthen DRI. Now, finally, just in the case of NBS, we also have a technology readiness checklist, which is a practical and action-oriented tool within this workstream. And yet again, like I mentioned, it can enable a wide range of stakeholders to systematically assess their readiness across 7 key elements, These include governance, financing, institutional capacity, data systems, and partnerships. This checklist follows a clear four-stage process. It begins with diagnosing a current readiness, where organizations can assess themselves through a set of targeted questions across each of these 7 elements. Then, in the second stage, we focus on prioritization, where these results are synthesized and often visualized through radar charts to clearly identify where readiness is strong and where targeted action is needed. And the third step is really about action. So, those priorities that we've identified are translated into a roadmap with clear actions, responsibilities, timelines, and resources. And finally, we also come to the conclusion that this is not a one time exercise. The idea is to keep tracking progress over time, repeat the assessment, keep learning and adjusting so that it becomes an ongoing process. So ultimately, the focus shifts from just talking about technology to actually making it work and embedding it in practice. So with this, we move on to the finance component in GEAR 2025, and I invite Eddie to kindly present these slides.
Thank you, Shwari. And actually, again, I encourage you to take a look at our working paper on finance for resilient infrastructures. A lot of details there. But the first message is to say, look, it's not just talking about winning more money. It's what type of financial instrument is needed to strengthen the capacity to absorb, the capacity to respond, and the capacity to recover, because you need to have funding that allows you to have emergency disaster funds and credit lines for very rapid response, parametric insurance for that initial investments that you need to do, and for recovery you need to have special taxes and recovery funds and credit lines and public asset insurance. Now this looks very complicated, and you may think, oh, it's only sophisticated OECD countries that can do that. And guess who did we find had the best system and the best combination of these layered financial instruments? Jamaica. Jamaica has been working over the last 10 years to put all of these little boxes in places to be able to mobilize at different times and with different amounts and in different responses, everything that they need to be able to do the resilient infrastructure. So seeds are leading on the financial instruments, and there is a lot of experience that you can learn from each other. Next. What we did also in the financial resilience is to say, look, let's try to do a financial resilience framework. How do you get a country to begin in very practical steps to analyze, are we ready? Do we have the instruments? Do we have enough funding? On the quantitative analysis, do we have the right financial instruments? But also a series of questions and a questionnaire to say, are institutions ready? Is it my Minister of Finance ready? Are the ministries of the different infrastructure sectors ready? What is the governance arrangements of all of these financing needs, disbursements, mechanisms? What are the capacities at different levels in the budget departments ready? And do we have the partnerships ready with the international financial institutions, with the bilateral and donor agencies, with the banks, to be able to have all of this structure in place? So I encourage you to take a look at the infrastructure financial framework, because we found it really useful and a practical way to start assessing, are we ready or not? Ranjini.
Thank you, Ede. We move on to the governance chapter now. Again, this is perhaps one of the most interesting chapter. It is very detailed. It provides a lot of evidence, very interesting case studies. We will not be able to cover, all the insights that the report provide in this presentation, but I will try to highlight the central messages, and also like to mention that there are 8 memos that the report provides, and all these memos are targeted to different ministries and stakeholders, and also very relevant for strengthening the overall governance for disaster resilient infrastructure. So the first and the most important message of the governance chapter is that resilience begins with good governance. What the chapter does is, the chapter on the governance and institutions, it centers around infrastructure service delivery actors. It's very important to take a note of this point, because the focus is on infrastructure delivery actors, and it also tries to look at how Infrastructure service delivery incorporates resilience as a core feature, and how institutions responsible for such delivery reflects the need for greater reliability and endurance in a situation of a disaster. And here you will see there are key messages provided for finance ministries, for disaster risk management ministries. The second important message of the governance chapter is also that infrastructure resilience is not the responsibility of the infrastructure agencies alone. Without the decisive and coordinated support of ministries of finance, national planning agencies, land use planning agencies, and other infrastructure service providers, subnational government, and legislators, infrastructure services will not be resilient. So it clearly highlights the role and the responsibilities of the various actors and how they all need to come together and work together to build the governance around resilient infrastructure. The third very important message that emerges, so my slide is of course highlighting the key messages for the local governments. As I said, there are too many important recommendations and insights captured in this chapter, but the central message is also that the capacity of infrastructure agencies to build resilience of their assets and networks depend on the capacity of the private sector to provide resilience. And in the earlier slides, I talked about the capacity, the perspective on from the various professionals who are working in the domain of infrastructure and how they perceive the role of private sector and what are their views on what kind of capacities the private sectors have. So the need is to have a strong cadre of infrastructure professionals who can continuously contribute towards, building a strong governance around infrastructure resilience. And it's an extremely important for the government to invest on developing the capacities of the infrastructure professionals, as well as to work very closely with the professional associations. The fourth important message that comes from the governance chapter is also that infrastructure agencies and disaster risk management agencies must work together to develop integrated disaster preparedness plans, organize mock drills, strengthen the early warning system, and mobilize resources for early recovery and reconstruction. As you saw, the framework that we have been using to advocate for building resilience of infrastructure talks about capacity to absorb, to respond, and recover. So it is not only about building the resilience of the assets, but it's also about building the capacity of the infrastructure ministries to absorb the impact, of these shocks, to respond to it, and also to bounce back swiftly and recover faster. Next. So the GIR 2025 report is rich in data, evidence, and provide practical recommendations for a wide range of stakeholders. We encourage you to go through the report and the working papers that are already released. We have already released 7 working papers, and all of these resources are available in the CDRI's Learning and Knowledge Management platform, DRI Connect. I will request Aishwarya to also share the link of the platform in the chat, and we encourage you to go through these resources which are available. And also, in case you want to get in touch with us for more details, please feel free to reach out to CDRI through these email IDs. So with this, we come to an end to the presentation on the GIR report, and I hand over the floor back to Aishwarya. I know we are running, tight with respect to time. So back to you, Aishwarya, to take us to the next segment of the session.
Thank you so much, Ranjini. And I think now we move on to the final segment. So I'll invite Dr. Robert Gilt again to share some of his reflections and also to moderate a session with 2 of our distinguished panelists. Let me just quickly introduce them. We have Fuimao Simanu, who's the Chief Executive Officer in the Ministry of Works, Transport and Infrastructure in the Government of Samoa. And we also have Ms. Jennifer Allen, who's the Director, Infrastructure Policy and Engagement Section, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in the Government of Australia. So Dr. Robert, over to you.
Thank you, Aishwarya. Well, there's a lot to reflect on. I'm afraid I cannot do it justice in the few minutes that we have here today. I think the contribution of this report in demonstrating the assets at risk and the average annual losses really is cause for serious attention. And the tools that are presented here are tools that will help across a number of dimensions. I think the thing I am most interested in hearing, and I want to turn it to our discussants, is if you're advising a government or a Pacific regional organization or a development partner, where do we start? What is the sequence, the priority sequence for starting to make progress? Because it's not realistic to move on all 7 dimensions simultaneously. All Pacific Island countries have quite urgent needs in just risk assessment, never mind the other dimensions. So I'd like us to think about practical steps to move this agenda forward. But you're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to practitioners. So with that, Aishwarya, do you want me to introduce our discussants, or are you going to do that?
I did introduce them, Robert. You can go ahead, and we're posting the detailed bios also for the audiences.
Okay, so let's
You
start
can say
with, I'd like to start with Fui Mausimanu, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ministry of Works, Transport and Infrastructure in Samoa. Fui, Talofalava, please, let's have your wisdom.
Hello, Robert. Nice to see you again. Thank you for the invite. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
All right. Before I say anything, I just want to comment. Excellent report. I'd like to congratulate everybody that was involved in the writing of this report, as the research and everything that came together. I really enjoyed reading it. And as I say that, it's because when I was reading the report, it struck so many chords, so to speak. As someone with more than 30 years in the infrastructure sector, first as a foot soldier, and then somebody in middle management, designing, supervising, and project management, and finally at the top end making the decisions. I've seen them all, especially living in an island that's very, very vulnerable to all sorts of disasters. But I'm very mindful of the time, so I'm just going to be quick. And some of the things when I was reading the report and also hearing the presentations today, what I'm going to say is that for good infrastructure, and from my experience, first of all, strong legislation. And I mean that regulations, policies, standard operation procedures, even acts that govern these things. So basically, good governance. Secondly, we need a workforce that's highly capable to look after these assets. So here in the islands, we fall into the trap that the donor comes in, give us the money, and we build something. And then the donor has the expertise. Once the donor leaves, 5 years down the pipeline, the asset starts to fall apart. So we need a very, very good succession plan and making sure that the skills and the knowledge is being transferred during the construction and once when we move into the operation and managing the assets. Third, we need very good synergy between the many actors that are involved. All right, and when I say that, I noticed that in the report, there's like the multi-government agency things that need to work together. We also got community groups. So we got engineers, we got all these non-government organizations. So it's all part of a system that will form into one. And at the end, we need very, very, very good planning, which means that we need good asset management. And that is something that I think, as an engineer, I can testify that if you are looking after an asset that costs $1 million, you need to have proper asset management to ensure that it's gonna produce the goods for as long as you want it to be. We also need innovation and leaders that can think on the run. So making decisions and it's one thing to be sitting and thinking about something, but it's also another thing when you're actually at the site and looking at things and say, okay, this needs to go there, this needs to go here. So that sort of decision making is that it will really help in developing good infrastructure. Needs good oversight. And what I mean by that is that the role of a regulatory body. I'm not going to mention it, but we do have a donor that comes in with its own codes and its own ideas, and as a little island and not poor, so the adage beggars can't be choosers come in there. So, but we need to be strong that we do have standards and we do have codes, the building codes that we need to abide by, and that's how we can make these things resilient. Ownership of the asset is another thing that's really important. And also another thing, maybe Robert, you can understand it. It happens in the Pacific. Donor shows up with money. All right, I've got a certain amount of dollars, and then we run around and try to come up with something that hopefully we can convince the donor to channel that money to. But how we should do things is that you sit down, plan it, and then you go out and look for funding, because then you've actually thought it through. You've you looked at all your at your asset from all the angles, and this is what you're developing and what you're designing and what you're thinking about is something that has been really, really discussed at all sorts of certain stages. So that is because I'm very mindful of the time, but there's a lot of things that come into, and I know that working in infrastructure and seeing things develop, seeing things built, and seeing things fail, it has taught us a lot of things and how to make sure that we can improve and how we can make things resilient. I am here in Fiji simply because I'm here to join PRIF, the workshop, and also to hopefully to meet people, some contractors that will build me some more a dam, which is the flood control dam. It's going to cost us about 120 million US dollars, thanks to the Asian Development Bank. But that is the sort of thing we've decided that in 2012, we had Cyclone Evan that it destroyed a lot of our infrastructure. So it's about 200 million US dollar damage. That's about 30% of the GDP. So the project that we are working on is that we're gonna build a dam that will control the flow of the water downstream, and it's a massive project that has been in the pipeline for a number of years now, and it is something that we're really looking forward to seeing it happen, and hopefully we will have a really, really good product at the end. So it's all about climate resilience. It's all about helping protecting our people and be very, very mindful of the changes in climate that will keep on happening. So thank you, Robert. I'm sorry that the time is, we are all slaves to the timing, but thank you for the opportunity.
Spoken like an experienced engineer. Fafatai Telelava. Boy, that was really good. I love your emphasis on asset management. It's so important to maintain those infrastructure services after things are built. And of course, it's another dimension to the report and to the work that you do on a daily basis. So really appreciate your participation here today and look forward to seeing you next week in Nandi.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me turn to our second discussant of the day, Ms. Jennifer Allen, who is Director for Infrastructure Policy and Engagement in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade from Australia and a member of my management committee. Jen, over to you, please.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, everyone. I'd really like to just start by thanking PRIF and CDRI and my fellow discussant for joining this webinar today. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to meet and discuss this very, very welcome report, because I think we're all here with the same shared goal.
Oh, man.
I think Jennifer's.
We've lost you, Jen.
Yeah, it looks like.
That is a shame. I will message Jen, and while I'm doing that, maybe Aishwarya, you could take over for the time being.
Yes, let me just.
Aishwarya, let me just react to a couple of points, Mr. Mao, that were so practical. And I think that this issue of governance and capacity is one that we spend a lot of time. But more importantly, is the coordination across. Our message was that resilient infrastructure is not just the job of the infrastructure agencies. It is the job of everybody, meaning it is the job of, yes, infrastructure agencies at the center, but that relation with Ministry of Planning, with Ministry of Finance, with the communities that they are serving and providing infrastructure services to. The businesses that depend, the businesses that provide resilient services to them, the designers, the engineers, all of those that you mentioned. Making sure that everybody understands the needs, understands the capacities, and brings us contribution to make the overall system critical becomes really important for resilient infrastructure. Second, we began to say, look, there's insufficient money in the world to make all of our infrastructure resilient to the level of, say, the Netherlands. Why? Because the Netherlands and their water boards have been working on flood protection for 600 years. So they have been investing every year for 600 years to get to where they are. And therefore, countries cannot do that. And the question is, prioritization becomes really critical. And we said, look, things that you may not believe or may not think are related to resilience are really important and are really cost effective. Good maintenance, making sure that before the hurricane season in the Caribbean, the drainage systems are clean, that the manholes are clean, all the process makes a huge difference in making infrastructure resilience. Being able to understand, and engineers on the ground have a pretty good sense of what are the weakest links of the infrastructure. Things that international consultants will never know, bringing that local expertise and combining it with the more sophisticated international design criteria makes all the difference in not, because there's not enough money, into try to strengthen the weakest link of the system if there's not enough money to make every link more resilient. And third, I really like what you said, which is the standards, but the standards also need to be are very connected to governance, meaning you can have the best standards, but if the engineers, the contractor supervision doesn't understand that, doesn't know how to implement those standards, then it doesn't work. Standards on paper, beautiful. Standards on the ground can only be done by engineers that know their work in that process, by engineers that are empowered to do that job, by contractors, masons, builders, everybody who is involved in that value chain really have enough the capacity for infrastructure. And I see that Jennifer is back, so I fill up the time until you realize came back. Come, thank you.
Well done, Eddie.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, I'm terribly sorry about that. My computer just crashed at the worst moment. But really what I wanted to say was, I think we're all here with this shared goal of working on high quality and resilient infrastructure across the Pacific. And so just how welcome this report is and this webinar. And I wanted to congratulate those who are involved, because the depth of analysis and the work that's gone into it is very impressive. But I think that the aspect of it that I've really taken out of the discussion today is the practical advice. And so hearing from my fellow discussant about the practical application of how we can take this forward, and Robert, that was something that you called for, is really, really important. because I think the report is calling for a shift in how we approach things. But that's also what I've heard, and I think what our Pacific partners have been saying, and it's certainly the approach that the Australian Infrastructure Financing Facility for the Pacific is working to support, and that is resilience as one of the guiding principles in the Pacific Quality Infrastructure Principles, or the PQIPs, and I think TT's on the line as well. These principles set very clear expectations for quality and resilience, and so looking at the report today and the practical suggestions in that context is very, very helpful. I can't claim to have the depth of knowledge that Robert and the other discussants have, or the knowledge of those who've contributed to the report. So from my perspective, it's a thank you, and how welcome this information is. The final thing I wanted to say about what I'm hearing today is how important partnerships are, and how important it is to have these sorts of settings between governments and development partners, practitioners, and it's thanks to regional organisations like PRIF and technical bodies like CDRI that we can have these conversations. And so let's keep contributing to this effort to have resilient and quality infrastructure in our region. Thank you, everyone. And again, I'm sorry that I cut out the key moment.
But you proved your resilience by making your way back in. So thank you very much, Jen Allen. I am conscious that we have run over our allocated time. You can blame me as your undisciplined moderator, but I think it was worth getting in all of those points. Let me just thank our two discussants sincerely for sharing your experience, the presenters for doing such an excellent job under pressure of summarizing a very rich document in a very short time. And I will turn it back to the CDRI team.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Robert. So I think with that, we've come to a close. We're very grateful to all of our distinguished speakers and panelists to give their time and join us for this session. We also hope that all the participants found it very engaging. And please go through the knowledge products that we have. I'm sure you'll find it very interesting, and we'll have many more such webinars in the coming months. So with that, I think we can close the webinar, and thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.